Welcome to the Whistle Stop Wanderers. Today, we're jumping off Amtrak and stopping in Sandusky, Ohio. Sandusky is full of abolitionists, ice harvesters, roller coasters, and Romanesque stone. We're going to talk about how a grand Romanesque depot on Sandusky Bay connects stories of abolitionist safe houses, Civil War POWs, one of the nation's largest ice industries, and the birthplace of roller coaster tourism, all in one stop along the Lakeshore Limited and Floridian lines. So, as always, I utilize the Amtrak timetables, the Great American Stations website, the local Erie County Historical Society, any local museums. Here we had the Maritime Museum, the Merry-Go-Round Museum, and the Follett House Museum. On-site visits, so we went to Washington Park, the Jackson Street Pier, and the train depot. So in the 1880s, Sandusky Bay was carved into 50 massive ice houses, the largest concentration in the nation. So horses were used to saw through the frozen lake, and men hauled the blocks ashore, and they would move this ice into ice houses. The ice houses were built of wood, and then the walls were insulated with sawdust. And then they would also pack sawdust around the ice. And the ice could last about 3 years. So that was really important in the age before refrigeration because you were able to keep your food much longer utilizing this ice. The bay was also home to the Underground Railroad. It was a harbor, and it was used countless times to ferry people to Canada. There was also a ferry dock for Cedar Point visitors, and there was a Confederate prison site on the nearby Johnson's Island. So Sandusky's always been a city of many layers. There's a lot going on. Stone, ice, steam, steel. But today we're going to try and focus a little bit on a few key topics: the revolutionary roots and the city planning of the town, the downtown legacy and its survival after inclement weather. There was a big tornado, the railroad, streetcars, interurbans of the area, ice, stone, and industry, cultural life, the libraries, courthouse, other preservation items, the Amtrak station currently, as well as the depot architecture. We'll touch on that a little bit. And then local life, tourism, and Cedar Point. So after the American Revolution, Connecticut residents who were displaced by British raids were granted land in Northeast Ohio because Ohio is Connecticut's western reserve. And the area that was given to the residents was known as the Firelands. They were named the Firelands because the residents were burned out of their homes along the Connecticut River. So they were burnt out of their homes, their farms, their businesses, and so the federal government gave them these lands after the treaties were made with the Native Americans. So Sandusky was officially laid out in 1818 by Henry Kilbourne. He was a Mason, and so if you look at maps, you'll see that the town is actually laid out as a square and a compass. So it makes for a couple unique intersections, but it's interesting. So the city itself was built on limestone. So Sandusky has a limestone base, which is great for building foundations and quarrying and things, but it's not so great for drinking water because they kept having cholera outbreaks due to the poor groundwater. And until they installed shallow waterworks in 1875, they had this persistent death, unfortunately. So the city did persevere. As I stated, downtown survived, and it also survived a tornado. In 1924, on June 28th, there was a tornado that killed 8 people in Sandusky and 70 more in Lorain, Ohio. And it remains one of the most destructive tornadoes in Ohio history. And you can see there's tons of photos of downtown as it was affected by the tornado, as well as nearby farms and places that were in the path of the tornado. Washington Park in the downtown area was actually all limestone. Everything. So they actually had to excavate 2 feet of limestone to be able to put this park in. And then they filled the park in with soil and they use the excess stone to pave Putnam Street, which is a nearby roadway. The park itself is really unique. They have a lot of mounds and greenery and things that they change all the time. There is the boy with the boot statue that stood there for generations. And the city greenhouse curates the plants for the park. My favorite is the living clock. So the clock itself, I mean, it's mechanical, but the times are laid out with greenery and plantings, and then also they have the date, which they change every day, that is made up of plants. So I really like that. I think it's really cool. So again, when we talk about Sandusky's downtown, it's really unique because to me, I always feel like I'm just gonna fall into the lake. The main roadway just pretty much dead ends into the lake. And back in the old days, the trains would go right along the lakefront, basically. So the Mad River and Lake Erie Railroad were chartered in 1826. And in 1837, the Sandusky locomotive was the first to have a steam whistle installed. Later, the railroad became part of the Cincinnati, Sandusky, and Cleveland Railroad, and the Big Four line was added in 1889. The Sandusky Streetcar Company was launched in 1881, but they used horse cars, so horses pulled the trains. It wasn't until the 1890s that the line was electrified. In 1893, the Sandusky Norwalk Interurban was the world's largest, and the Lakeshore Electric ran hourly between Cleveland and Sandusky. So if you lived in Cleveland and you wanted to go to Cedar Point, you could hop on the Lakeshore Electric and be there in under an hour, and then hop on the ferry over to Cedar Point. So that was quite a nice benefit. So next we'll talk a little bit about industry. In the 1880s, as I said, there was about 50 ice houses made up of about 22 companies. And then also the Wagner Stone Company was founded in 1903, which is still actively quarrying today. Like I said, this area is known for its limestone. As far as cultural life goes, libraries, the courthouse preservation, the Sandusky Library is a Carnegie building. It was built in 1901. It traces its roots back to the Portland Library, which was started in 1825. Sandusky was originally sometimes called Portland before it was finalized that they were going to call it Sandusky. The Ladies Library Association also got together in 1870, so all the libraries sort of merged together to become the Sandusky Library. The Erie County Courthouse is right off of that main Washington Square, or Washington Park area, and it was originally built in 1874 as a Second Empire building. So there are some old photos of it with the old Second Empire sort of detailing, which are amazing. But one of the great things about this building is that it was not demoed. They did not tear it down when they decided that they didn't like it as much anymore. Back in the 1800s, housings and styles and detailing often were like fashion, the fast fashion. They would be torn down if it was no longer a trend or popular. This building actually just got remodeled in the 1930s. So they were like, hey, we like Art Deco now. So they took off the mansard roof, they took off the elements that were a little bit too French Second Empire, and just redid the building. How fantastic is that, to be able to save that structure? Other old structures in town are the Cook House, which was built in 1843, and the Follett House, which was built in the 1830s. They are preserved as museums. I don't believe the Cook House is currently open for visits, but sometimes it is. And Sandusky High School was actually built in 1866, and it is still being used, but it's being used as a junior high. Also, there is the Maritime Museum that you can visit. There is a small fee, but if you're lucky, you could go on a day like we did where they're doing free museum entry. So that was pretty cool. They do have a video that you can watch while you're there. It's about 15 or 20 minutes long, and it sort of tells you like what I'm doing. The history of the town, the history of the bay. It's much more maritime focused, of course. But like I said, they do also have exhibits. So they have some of the ice harvesting equipment. They have some of the wooden boats that were built in the area. They have items from the Beckling, which was one of the ferries that would go back and forth from Cedar Point. And then they also have like a freighter section and some of the different types of coal that were brought into the area for fuel. But it was really interesting. Next, we'll talk about the actual Amtrak depot. So, again, like I said, this area is built, there's limestone everywhere. So, Richardsonian Romanesque and just Romanesque in general, really heavy stone buildings are popular and prevalent here. So, the depot is actually an original 1892 Richardsonian Romanesque depot. It was built by Shepley, Rutan, and Coolidge. It's built of Amherst limestone. It has a blue-green slate roof. It has deep arches and open walkways. It did have a separate baggage house originally. That building is no longer in use just because train travel's changed in the past 100 years. And there was a 8-year hiatus where Amtrak was not stopping at this location. And in 1979, they remedied that situation. So they did have like a chrome railroad spike ceremony in regard to that. Today, like I said, the Floridian and the Lakeshore Limited do stop at this station, but they stop in the early morning. And if you do stop, like I said, there are tons of things to do. You could go to the Merry-Go-Round Museum, and it's just like it sounds. It's a museum with a merry-go-round that is actively working. You get a little souvenir ticket. It's like a plastic card, and they will stamp it or like hole punch it for your ride, and then you get to keep it. So you do get a souvenir included. But the ride was much faster than I anticipated. I don't know if it was because I was riding a merry-go-round in an old post office off of Washington Park in Sandusky, or if it's because I am much older and have not ridden a merry-go-round in a very long time. But it was, as I said, quite fast. There were 2 benches on the merry-go-round, so you could ride those sitting down if you like. You don't have to ride the actual merry-go-round. And there was like the original Wurlitzer organ in there, so it was really cool. Also in the museum is a lot of the different horses in different states of carving, as well as different types of carvings. One in particular that I really liked was they had a horse, as it were, from the merry-go-round at the Eiffel Tower, and it was really cool. Inside this museum, they also have a Cedar Point museum. So they had all kinds of different memorabilia from Cedar Point. One of my favorite things as a kid going to Cedar Point, as a local, was that they would have these like ride signs, and it would say you have to be this tall, but it would be like an artist had drawn it, and they'd have one for the Demon Drop or the Blue Streak. And so they had this area where they had all those signs, and it was really cool to see those preserved. Also, I can remember as a kid, even the garbage cans had like art on them. They were designed, it would tell you basically what part of the park you were in, like the Gemini section or Frontier Town or, wherever near the railroad. And they had all these garbage cans and all the different designs that the artists had done over the years. So it was really cool. Cedar Point started in the 1830s, and Beckling was the one who really sort of kicked it off in 1897 with his resort company. By 1900, he had ferries arriving every 30 minutes. So you'd leave the Jackson Street Pier, pop on over to Cedar Point, and then when you were done for the day, you go back down to Jackson Street Pier. At that time, there was no access on foot, a rail line, an interurban, anything, bicycle. There was only ferry access. Today, it is accessible by car. It's about 1,200 acres. There are 17 roller coasters, and you can actually see the skyline from the depot as well as the Jackson Street Pier. Another interesting thing about Sandusky is it is home to Ohio's oldest dairy, Toff's. Toff's was started in 1900, and they are famous for their ice cream. So they have a bunch of parlors around, and there is one nearby in Sandusky. I did mention Johnson Island. Johnson Island is out in the Sandusky Bay, and it is where we kept the Confederate prisoners of war. And this location was preserved. There is a Civil War cemetery out there and some markings as well. As far as Other things that are out in the bay, there is Put-in Bay, Middle Bass Island, and just the Lake Erie Islands in general. So this area has a lot of ferries as well as boaters that go to these different locations for the summer. Like I said, there is a bunch of downtown dining. There is that Jet Express that goes to the islands. And the downtown is super walkable and historic. So I appreciate you taking the time to visit and wander through Sandusky, Ohio with me. From stonecutters to streetcars, ice harvesters to roller coasters, this town has layers upon layers upon layers of history. And it runs deeper than the bay. The Sandusky Bay is about 6 feet deep. It's not very deep at all. The western basin of Lake Erie is very shallow. But next time that you are taking Amtrak through the area, either on the Lakeshore Limited or the Floridian, take a day, hop off the train, go to Cedar Point, go to the Merry-Go-Round Museum. There are some really great places to visit, regardless of the speed at which you want to do stuff. You can visit the historic sites, you could go to Cedar Point and go to the roller coaster. If you're looking for something relaxing or want to see what the ride actually looks like, go ahead and check out our Floridian video. This shows our ride from Ohio down to Florida and then back. Thanks for spending time with me today. Bye.